Hi, today I want to talk a little bit about some of the current and, well, obviously past situations in the Colombian political situation. As some of you may be aware, well, I guess most of the people watching this video are vaguely interested in these topics. Recently in Colombia, particularly in the last couple of weeks, we've had protests. They're being reported as strikes, but at least from where I live, which is Antioquia, rural Antioquia, East Antioquia, I haven't really seen any strikes at all, to be honest. Absolutely nobody that I'm aware of has not gone to work because of what's been happening recently. However, I am aware that there's been protests various places. There's been protests in Medellin. I think they haven't been as largely attended as, say, some of the protests in Bogota. And I think that from at least what I see on the internet, there are some ongoing protests in Bogota, which have now turned into concerts and other things. It's at least looking at it kind of, even though I'm in Colombia, like looking at it from the outside, because I don't see any protests where I am, you have the feeling that these protests are now kind of dwindling. Anyway, regarding this topic, I guess what I want to say is that when these kind of things happen, when there are protests, when there is kind of open voicing of discontent with the current political situation, then certain issues in the country seem to become more apparent. One of those issues, I think, is a disconnect between the capital city, Bogota, and other parts of the country, other cities, but also rural Colombia, which is, I think, the majority of the country. And then another major division that you see kind of appearing are people that are extremely against the current political government that we have, and people that are quite strident defenders of the current system. And I guess, obviously this is going to be a short video. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about these topics, but I just want to start to touch on some of these issues, because I just want to share a few thoughts about it. So the first thing I would say is that when we had in Colombia the referendum on the peace agreement in 2016, I was extremely in favour of the peace agreement. The reason I was in favour of it was not because I thought it was a perfect agreement. I don't think there will be a perfect peace agreement. I just don't think that on paper you can construct a document, or you're never going to please everybody, basically. This armed conflict has been going on for decades. Arguably it's been going on for hundreds of years, depending on what historical perspective you take on these events. And I certainly don't think that any government is ever going to produce a piece of bureaucracy that is going to satisfy everybody, or even anyone. There has been so much violence, so much trauma, so much silence about so many things, that it's almost insurmountable, the task of trying to achieve peace through pen and paper. Let's call it that. So I was extremely in favour of the peace agreement, and had I been able to vote on that issue, I was not, as I wasn't bureaucratically eligible at that time to vote on such issues, I would have voted in favour of it. It was a bit of a shock, I think, to many people when, as a majority decision, the country rejected the peace agreement. I remember the day after the peace agreement failed, and I remember speaking to my friend who I mentioned in the previous video, my friend who lives in Bogota actually, and I spoke to her, and I remember I was that day flying out to England, and my friend was crying on the phone. I think I cried as well. I can't remember. And I remember I was saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe this has happened. This is a disaster. What's going to happen now?" We were so upset, and I knew many people at the time who were extremely upset when the peace referendum failed from the government's point of view. And since then, as a country, we've had time to absorb that result. And, a couple of years later, a government, again, was democratically elected through majority decision that actively opposed the peace agreement. And, it's arguable that they were elected on a platform of we don't like this peace agreement, which the previous government pushed through anyway, despite the fact that the country rejected it in a referendum. So, where to start with this issue? A couple of years down the line, I have reflected on this, and I feel that it's such a complex situation for any government that is in power. And we're still in a situation where the country is, extremely divided. And a few months ago, I attempted to go to Granada, which is a village. It's really only 45 minutes away from where I live. And I went in my car, and the way I would get there from where I live is drove via Rio Negro, which is a city only 20 minutes away. Drove from Rio Negro down a motorway kind of style road, and then to get to this village, you turn off onto another little track, and it's really only, in theory, 20 minutes from there. So set out on that journey, and I've been to so many villages in this area, and I think I've been to almost all of the villages that surround the area where I live. And it's one of my favourite things to do, is to go to villages, see all the differences in the villages, take photographs, enjoy the local food, enjoy the people, enjoy the music, enjoy the bars, enjoy the clothing people wear. I mean, just every aspect. I absolutely love going and visiting villages. Now, when I went to Granada, I had never had the kind of experience that I had that day. I mean, as I turned off the main motorway to head to the village of Granada, very quickly the road completely disintegrates. And by disintegrates, I don't just mean that it becomes like a dirt track, because it's not a dirt track. I'm used to driving on dirt tracks. That's a different situation. That's where roads haven't been in place. The situation with Granada is that the village is arrived at. Sort of translating now from Spanish into English. It's kind of bilingual hell. You drive off, and suddenly there are massive holes in the road. Half of the road is just gone. And so I started asking the person that I was with, why is the road like this? Like, what is going on here? And this is when I was told a little bit about the history of Granada. I mean, Granada is a village that was, under assault or caught in the crossfire between guerrilla and paramilitary forces in the region. And as a result, there have been bomb blasts in the road. There are skeletal houses, houses where you just see the basic frame of the house, where the roof has either collapsed inwards through neglect or been blown outwards through violence. And so when you drive along a road like that for 20 minutes, it starts to take an emotional toll on you. In fact, no, I'm going to put it more in the first person, because I think that's a better way to it really took a toll on me. I mean, I found it extremely upsetting, an extremely heavy experience. And when you just pass house after house that would have been, or in some cases still is, extremely beautiful, that's just been abandoned by the people that lived there because it was, you know, such a violent and dangerous situation that people had to leave their homes. It's extremely upsetting. And then when we finally arrived at the village, actually we couldn't get out the vehicle because it was just so, we were in so much pain through what we had seen just driving along, that we decided, well, do you know what, actually I've lost my appetite, let's go. And that's not because the village is not beautiful. You arrive and it's a village with two squares that's, you know, it's quite straight, it's extremely slopey, so you're sort of driving up and down, you know, roads that are absolutely insane. You know, you really need very good brakes to drive somewhere like that. But I had never had an experience like that. Now, the reason I'm telling you this story is that I think that when I read a lot of news reports, particularly written by international journalists, and by international journalists, I tend to mean people that are often not local, people that are often foreign, although not always, and people that tend to move around. So they tend not to inhabit a particular place for a very long time. They might move around different cities, often in Latin America or other places, and report, you know, what they see in those places. Well, in some cases they're reporting hearsay without even, you know, going to the events. So when I read things like that, I've started to, how can I put it? Like, I've started to be less influenced by what they say, because I find that they're often quite disconnected from the ongoing situations in these places. I mean, in the case of the village I just mentioned, in the case of Granada, this village is extremely close to where I live, at least in time, journey time, and yet even though we're living in what is politically termed a situation of post-conflict, el post-conflicto, you realise that the reparations of what has been going on, or what some people say is still going on, has just not taken place. So, reflecting again on the peace referendum, I feel that, you know, despite how much I would like the document that was you know, created a couple of years ago to be you know, for the decisions that were taken then by the government to be implemented, because that was the agreement that was achieved, imperfect as it was. I recognise that for a lot of people, they just don't feel that you know, much has been repaired. I think everybody is living in a sort of, you know, forget post-conflicto, let's talk about, you know, a post-traumatic situation. For those of us here where I live, it's a kind of post-traumatic situation, because there are no longer guerrilla or paramilitary in this area. There are still in other areas of the country, but not where I am. And for those people, they haven't really had either the time or any kind of psychological help to cope with what's been happening. And over decades, you know, the violence. And as a result of that, I think people, they don't really trust, you know, that political decisions, particularly those that are taken quite far away from them, you know, in Bogota or elsewhere, are, you know, really looking out for them. I think Granada, the fact that you have this road that connects Granada to other parts of the country, that still has giant holes, that still has abandoned houses, that still has broken roofs everywhere, that still has, you know, a very, you know, dark atmosphere, you know, if you drove along that road, represents the lack of repair that has taken place for people. You know, the question is, what would repair look like? You know, how can we as a society, because I now see myself as part of this society, and I now see myself in various ways as affected by the war, somebody that continues to be affected by the war, somebody that has relationships with people that has been affected by the war. The question is, how can we begin to repair some of the damage gradually, so that we can move on from this as a society, so that we can build peace, either through increased governmental action, but also interpersonally, through one another. So I guess what I want to say is that I feel that I understand the wish, particularly amongst foreigners like myself that haven't been here very long, that see all the injustices around us. I understand the wish and the push and the need for change, for justice, for fairness, for education, for economic mobility. I understand all of those things. I want it myself very deeply, but I'm also aware that people haven't, the vast majority of people are not being given any help to process all the things that have happened, and so they're living in a permanent scary situation where they think this could start to happen again at any moment. And so society is divided in two: people that say, we've got to get rid of this government that we have, we've got to get rid of this military approach to our problems, because we don't want a repetition of what's been happening. And then on the other side, you have people that say, we need to support the present government, we need to support the military so that this doesn't happen again. So on both sides, people do not want a repetition of what's been going on. The problem is neither side seems to understand the other one or the reasons. I don't find it easy to live in a heavily militarized country, and I'm aware that where I live, probably the military has a lower presence than it might do in other parts of the country, although a greater presence again than it might have in other parts of the country. I live extremely close to where the ex-president Álvaro Uribe has his farm. I live, very short distance from that. And, for that reason and other reasons, there is a very, present, ongoing military in the area. Every day I drive past army with, massive guns. There's no way of getting around it. And I look at these young boys, they are young, and I look at them and I feel so many different things when I look at these people, and sometimes it's almost too painful for me to look at them, and in that way I can start to feel myself becoming desensitized by living in a military state. A state that is maintained in its current situation by force in so many ways, by the army, by the culture of gated communities, which are paramilitary housing estates, in my view. I wouldn't know how else to define that. Where you're living in a place that is surrounded by an iron fence, where people have guns, and if that wasn't the case, then your house might be extremely vulnerable. Let's put it that way. So living in a militarized state, and as a woman passing by army day after day after day with giant guns that have the right to stop my car, to check my papers and deal with me as they see fit, is an unpleasant situation. I would not want to live in a military enforced country if I had the choice. That is the situation we live in at the moment, and I understand why we're living like that. We're living like that because of things that have happened previous to me being here. And so, in conclusion, I feel that as foreigners living in Colombia, and at the moment there's probably still a relatively small number of us living in the country, there are more travelling in the country, I think we need to be a bit humble and a bit compassionate to both sides, because we haven't lived through a lot of the things that our friends, our families, our Colombian families, our neighbours, our you know, our colleagues at work, we haven't lived through all of the situations that they've lived through. And they have memories, particularly of not being able to travel anywhere in the country, you know, of being, you know, basically trapped at home. So, you know, this week people have complained in Bogota about curfew situations. You know, I'm not living in Bogota, so I don't know what the reality of that is. They complain about having helicopters in the sky and things in the sky. You know, I have helicopters over my house every day, so I think I've become a bit blasé about it. You know, I live very close to the airport. Rio Negro, as I said, I live close to the ex-president. There is a lot of army activity where I live, so I'm used to it. So I think if you live in Bogota and you're not used to it, you know, I can see why foreigners and international journalists react to it. They say, "Oh, this is, you know, this is a change." For those of us that are used to it, it's like, you know, it's like, you know, it's like we live like it every day. So I think that we need to really be careful about taking very, very strong opinions about things without necessarily having had the experiences that other people might have had that have led them to form opinions that don't necessarily conform with our own. And yeah, I think I'd better leave it there for now anyway, and maybe, you know, I'll revisit some of these issues in more detail. Okay, thank you for listening. Bye.